Hey everyone, welcome to the Story Builder podcast. I am thrilled to be with my friend Kent Sanders. Kent, thank
How
you
are you,
so
sir?
much for chatting with me.
Thank you. It's my
And
pleasure.
thank you. And Kent is a author, a ghostwriter, a author coach. Um, I'm not sure about the singing and dancing part, but I feel you could pull it off
It was
because
more high school.
you used to be a worship pastor. So I feel like you
I
could do
did.
it.
Don't hold that against me because most of those guys are high maintenance. I mean, I'm
Most
just being
writers
honest.
are
It's
high
true.
maintenance too,
Yeah, that's true. Most writers are high maintenance. So
right?
I've got a consistent career track going here. So
Now, you just released a book, Kent, and
I
you
did.
could hold it up for me and share it so we can capitalize on this amazing book
So
you just
this
wrote.
is called Your Book Means Business.
Ooh.
I wrote this with Honore Corder. She is a business coach, very successful author. She does, she calls them bespoke publishing. Uh, She does bespoke publishing for business clients, and what that means is that basically it's like a concierge level ghostwriting and publishing and marketing book process. She doesn't do the marketing for clients.
Mhm.
She develops a very strategic plan to help them maximize their revenue from their book, develop income streams, and to create a whole business around their book. So every project is different. I'm the primary ghostwriter that she uses for those projects. So this was kind of interesting because with this book, and I'll hold up the cover again so
Yeah,
everybody can see it.
thank
It's
you.
called Your Book Means Business. Save time, make money, and dominate your industry with the power of a bespoke book. So she wanted to go through the process herself of having a book ghostwritten for her.
Mhm.
So basically, with this book, the way that we produced it was exactly what we do for clients. So it's kind of a
That's
very
great.
meta way of doing it. So I was essentially the ghostwriter. She wrote some sections of it too, and it was extremely collaborative. It was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun. So
I like that kind of testing out the waters and finding out what it's like. So for the customer, it'll be the same exact way. That's really
yeah,
cool.
yeah.
Very
Yeah, it
cool.
was a really fun project. Just came out. I think officially the release date was this past Monday
Right.
or something.
Congrats.
So
Every
this is,
book in the world, man. That's fantastic.
yeah, this is brand new.
That's awesome. And you've also written uh, four books on your own, right? Wasn't it?
Yes, I think three actually. So you would think as long as I've been doing this, I would have been more prolific by now with
It's
my own
okay.
stuff. But let me get them here. So one is a book called 18 Words to Live By, A
Ooh.
Father's Wisdom on What Matters Most. I wrote this for my son,
Mm-hmm.
um, who goes by Ash now. That's what we call him.
Okay.
So wrote this for him a few years ago for his 18th birthday. And then I wrote a book called The Artist Suitcase 26 Essentials for the Creative Journey. And this is basically my first attempt at turning blog posts into a book.
Yeah.
And this was fun to write. And then my first book was actually a book on the Evernote app, which hardly anybody uses anymore. I still use it and love it.
Right.
But it was a book on Evernote for pastors and church leaders specifically. So basically, a very finely tuned niche. Then let's see what we can do to niche it down even further. So pretty much nobody read or bought the book, but it was my first attempt at writing a nonfiction book. And I'm really thankful for the people at Church Mag Press who published that way back when. So
That's awesome. I remember reading this back in the day because you had the course to go with it.
I did. That was my first online course.
And
You're right.
talk about a learning process, Ken. This
It
is how
was.
we learn.
It
This
was.
is
I did
how.
have a few people actually buy the course. I don't remember what I charged for it. I think $47 or something, but I'd
Mhm.
spent a long, long time putting together this really huge, like hours long
Mhm.
course with tons of details. And I even I even did a version for Mac and I did a version for a PC and I was very anal retentive and granular about the whole thing. So it wasn't profitable on any level, but it gave me the confidence to then do more stuff. Because you know what it's like when you put something out there and then somebody buys it,
Mhm.
you have that feeling of, oh wow, somebody
Right.
actually paid me for this. Maybe I can do more of this. So I just encourage people to take action and put something together, sell it. You're going to change it in the future, probably, but just get that first thing out there and do it.
Get to work, put something out there,
Yeah.
keep tweaking, keep trying things.
Yeah.
Even if you're writing books, like I know I've written some practice novels. I didn't know they were practice at the time, but it's the same exact concept. It's like, hey, how do you become a writer? You write.
Yeah, you
So,
just write it and put it out there. I read something today. Where did I see this? Maybe it was somebody's email list or something, where they were talking about how every little piece of content or thing that you produce and put out there into the world, it's like a tentacle that
mm,
touches somebody. Some of them you don't get a response from. Maybe most things,
mhm,
like social media or emails, you don't necessarily get a response from, but you never know, because you never
right.
know when that thing that you put out there might come back to you in some way.
That's fair.
Yeah.
That's fair. Now, having written a lot of nonfiction books, blog posts, you have your podcasts, you know a lot about content and you focus primarily on nonfiction books. How have you like kind of narrowed it down? Like, hey, this is my approach. I'm starting a nonfiction book. Do you have like like where do you start? Like step one. Okay, you probably have an idea, but like where are you going next?
So that's a good question. The way that I approach it is, so I write books for myself, and I also write a lot of books for clients. Ghostwriting is
Mhm.
kind of my main thing. So I do books in a lot of different genres. I don't do any fiction, but I do books in a variety of styles, genres, voices, sizes, all that kind of stuff.
Mhm.
So where I always start with is, what does the person want from this book, including myself? And I think you have to articulate that, because if you don't know what you want the book to do for you or your business, then it becomes really hard to then know what your next step is. And I think a lot of writers, they just put stuff together and then put it out there. But then if you can't really articulate how you define success from that, how do
Mm,
you ever feel successful with something?
don't.
And the answer is you can't, because you
Right.
haven't defined for yourself what success is. And so if you don't know what that is, you're always gonna, even if a book is quote unquote successful to somebody else, then you're never really going to have that sense of, hey, this was worth investing in, or this was successful, because it's just sort of this, well, I don't really know if it worked or not, or whatever. And I think a lot of writers exist in that state of, well, I put this out here and I put this out there, and I'm kind of happy with it, but I don't really know what I want, and I'm just sort of trying things. And we all have to go through that, but I think there does come a point where you have to make some decisions about, what do you want your career to look like? What does that consist of? What kind of books do you want to be known for? What's your author brand? I think we can take that kind of to an extreme, because, you know, you are your brand, and you can even write different kinds of things. And at some point, you just become that brand, and whatever you put out there, people are going to be interested in, because it's you. I'm
Mhm.
not to that point yet. I haven't put out enough stuff over decades to, I think, reach that kind of level. But I
Mhm.
think it's something that we all aspire to.
Sure. Now, I think like the book I learned the most from that you've written was the 18 Words to Live By.
Oh, well, thanks. Thanks for reading that and supporting it, by the way.
I did. I loved it, and I shared it with some folks, and I even gave it to a friend of mine who he said he wanted to write a book. I said, check out this book first because I think it'll resonate with you, and
Hmm.
he loved it too. And
Cool.
I think the way you structured that book specifically was really really smart because you did it was alphabetically right, and you started
No, it wasn't
through
alphabetical. It was just it was 18 words. I mean,
18. Oh, it
literally.
was it started with 18
Yeah.
words,
Uh-huh. That
and
was
then
kind of the hook.
okay, 18 words was it, and then pardon me, the artist suitcase was alphabetically
Correct. Yeah.
right. So okay, so it was
It's kind
like
of a juvenile way to do a book, but it
I
was just
think
a
it's
hook.
smart. No, I think it's smart. And the 18 words, especially though, it was like each chapter, you knew what you were going to write about. You had like a
Right.
target on each chapter. And it broke down so nice where, you know, if we start getting into idea mode as writers, as storytellers, even, it's like we can get off track really,
Hmm.
really fast. But with your 18 words to live by specifically, you're like you had that target, you were zoomed
Hmm.
in, you knew exactly what you're shooting at, and you're like you can hold up your examples or mini stories, I would call them, of like things that are on topic, and say, hey, does this fit this specific word, or does
Right.
it fit this word over here? And you
Hmm.
can really kind of pick and choose the placement.
Yeah,
And it
totally.
probably made your life way easier saying, oh, starting with 18 words, and does
Yeah,
it fit or not, right?
that's the container. And I think every book you have to have a container when you start out with. For example, I'm working on a client book right now. So it's not a book for me, but it has, I would say it has a similar tone or vibe as the 18 Words to Live By book. So
Mhm.
where this book started out with was this is a guy who runs a large company, and we got in touch probably 2 3 months ago. He said he wanted to write kind of a book that was lessons that he learned about leadership. So he actually sent a list of, I think it was 12 or 15 potential chapter topics, and they were all really good. But the more that, so we had an initial conversation, and I suggested, well, there's so much good stuff in here. What if we break this out into 25 lessons? So he wanted to
Mm.
do a 50,000 word book. So I said,
Mhm.
well, what if we do 25? That way each chapter is about 2,000 words or so.
Yep.
Very
Yep.
readable. And this way, I think people will get more out of the book because they're going to be super quick reads, when they get into the chapters, and
Right.
it'll be faster to write. And
Sure.
plus, there's a lot of stuff that you want to put in this book. So kind of knowing the container of that, now when we get on calls together, content for the book, and whenever I'm taking that material and writing chapters out of it,
Mhm.
it's way easier because I know basically I need to hit around 2,000 words for each chapter.
Mhm.
There's going to be 2 or 3 stories, little short stories in each chapter. I'm going to have to sew those together with kind of a through line in each chapter. And I know what I need to get when I talk to him.
Mhm.
And knowing that container up front for me it's really helpful. Now, but I also know that not everybody works that way. And sometimes you
Sure.
have to just do a ugly, cruddy draft of a book and just
Mhm.
get your thinking out there. And then you kind of have to figure out, what do I do with all this mess? So books can come together in a variety of ways.
I like what you said though, specifically, like, I couldn't agree more. It's like that 25 chapters at 2,000 words
Hmm.
each. That's like perfect for note cards or a
Yeah.
poster board or sticky notes, and like you can break that down really, really fast.
Right.
And there's a momentum that comes when, if you're talking with that client and you're saying, hey, let's focus on X chapter right here on this topic. Again,
Right.
already, it's like, does it fit? Does it not fit? Oh, you know what? This conversation, I think this fits another chapter. I think it fits this other one over here.
Hmm.
See how this fits better. And you're like, sure,
Exactly.
okay. And that container analogy you said is great. And it's like, there's just so much momentum in that. And I think it's hard for most nonfiction writers to kind of come up with a structure that
It
fits.
is. That's why,
I
but you
mean,
don't have to guess at it. Every time that I create a book for somebody, I always have an idea in mind of what the end result is going to look like.
mm,
So whenever I start working with a client as a ghostwriter, I will always ask them, "Hey, what's 1 or 2 books, or maybe 3 or 4 books
mhm,
that really speak to you, that you like,
mhm.
that represent kind of the tone or the vibe that you're
Yep.
going for with your book?" That to me is immensely helpful,
Yeah.
even if it's in a totally different genre, or maybe it's not actually what they want. I got to have a starting point for what is the thing that we're creating here.
Yep.
Like, for some reason in the book world, we have this idea that, oh, it's got to be this like original thing and whatever. But movies are not original in terms of their structure. If sitcom writers, if you get hired by
Mhm.
network to create a sitcom
Yep.
and you're a writer, what do? You start out with the idea that it's going to be a 22-minute episode. You're
Yep.
going to have 2 or 3 commercial breaks. You're going to have typically an A storyline and a B storyline.
Yep.
If it's something like Seinfeld, you're going to have like 4 storylines potentially, and they're all going to connect in this very complex way.
Right.
So, like, you enter into it knowing this is the structure that we have, and now we don't have to guess. We know exactly what we're trying to create. So, even if it's your own stuff, I think having a model for what you want to create is to me, it's immensely helpful because that determines how many chapters does your book have? How long are those chapters? What are those going to be like? And then once you get that figured out, then you can make a series out of it if you want to.
What would you say to the writers, the storytellers out there? They're like, I don't know about this nonfiction thing. I mean, who cares what I have to say?
Oh gosh, I would say everybody's an expert on something. I think the very best thing that any writer can do is create a short nonfiction book, unless you want to exclusively do fiction. Then I would say do a book of short stories if you don't want to dive into a whole novel, and just get something out there fast. Make sure it's edited well. Make sure it has a good cover. Make sure the formatting looks good. If you're on a tight budget, use something like Vellum or Atticus or whatever.
Sure.
Please, for the love of God, do not use Microsoft Word to format your book. I'm literally begging every writer out there, please don't do that.
Right.
So make sure it looks good, present a professional product, but the sooner that you can get a short, and I'm emphasizing short, get a short little book out there of some kind, the sooner you're going to feel confidence from that, and the sooner you're going to stand apart from all the other writers who are like, oh, I really want to write this book, but it's gonna, it's gonna take me 3 years to write this 400-page novel or this giant memoir or whatever. So just get something out there for your first book, short, fast. I feel like that's really important. And the reason is because there's still magic in books. When you hand people so this is my Artist Suitcase book. When you hand people a print copy of your book and it's done well, that's magic because your esteem in that person's eyes automatically shoots up. Because guess what? You're an author with a good looking print book. You made something of value in the world. And I think that's really important.
I think we're also our own worst critic.
Oh, absolutely.
Right?
No question.
Perfectionism is like what stops most. And I remember you've said something about this before. I think it's your B work or even your C work is probably a lot better than you realize.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, unless you're just a really terrible writer, and there are those. There are some people who should never write a book by themselves. They should hire somebody to help them write it because they just don't have the skills to be coherent in writing. I think those people are actually more rare than we think they are. I think most people do have these skills to sit down and put together something coherent that has value for somebody. Now you might need a couple of editors to work on it.
Sure.
You might want to consider hiring a ghostwriter if you don't want to do that, blah, blah, blah. But I think most people do have something of value to say. So I just say put it out there because there are a lot of books that are really successful and the writing in them is nothing spectacular. But they're successful because, well, number one, the author marketed them well, or they hit an inflection point, or sometimes things just catch fire in culture, and that's totally great. But the person who is the one who writes the book and who carries through that project and they release it and they consistently tell people about it through marketing efforts, that's the person who's going to win. It's not the best writer, because I am totally convinced the world's best books have never been written because there are a lot of writers who are really, really gifted, who they've never gone to the trouble of actually putting a book out there into the world.
They don't push publish. They don't share it.
So, and you know what, if that describes you, not you, Jim, but if somebody's listening, if that describes you, then I challenge you to put a book out there, step up and have the courage to put your voice out there, because really cool things can happen whenever you do it. Like, books go places that we could never go ourselves.
I couldn't agree with you more. And I even will go one step further and I say everyone can write a book. I'm not saying everyone can be a bestseller, but I think everyone can write a book. Maybe it's just for your kids. Maybe it's a grandparent for their grandchildren. Maybe it's a really short book. Maybe, there are many different kinds of books. We sometimes like to only say, oh, well, there's nonfiction and there's fiction and there's novels. And I'm kind of like, I think that's a pretty limited viewpoint, because it's more like There are a lot of different kinds of books out there.
Hmm.
Short story compilations, even
That's right.
poetry. I mean, I obviously lean more toward fiction, but there are people that love poetry, and if you just ask them about it and like actually share your work, you'd be surprised. It's just usually we
Hmm.
stop ourselves and say, "Oh, they don't want to read this, or they don't like this, or it's not good enough," or those many questions or thoughts we can have that just they become roadblocks for
Yeah.
us.
I mean, and who determines this whole thing of something is good enough versus it's not good enough? Like there's a guy that I read. He's basically a celebrity gossip columnist. Now, I'm kind of embarrassed to admit that because I read his website every single day
It's okay.
because he's always in the know. This New York guy. He's always in the know about what's happening with this celebrity and what happened at this movie premiere and blah blah blah. And it's just kind of a fun, silly thing that I read. Plus, I just love entertainment news. But there's part of me that's like, people who are critics, they have limited value in the world because all that they do is they sit back and they just critique everybody else's stuff and they just share gossip about this or that. They go to parties, they talk to celebrities.
Right.
They're not the ones actually creating culture. They are talking about culture, but they're
Right.
not creating really anything of value. And that's now, obviously, I read it. A lot of people read this guy's site. He's made a whole living off of this. So he is actually contributing value.
Mhm.
But in terms of, I would rather be the person making something that other people are talking about than
Mhm.
being the person who's always on the sidelines talking about the other stuff that people make. That's why I think real creators don't have the time or the energy to spend all day critiquing other people's stuff. They're too busy making something of value. So, I mean, I think you have to, if you hire an editor, if you hire a coach, you need to listen to those people if they're good and their critiques of your stuff. But I think what we do is we make stuff for the world to enjoy and to move them and to change their life or help them in some way. So I don't know. I just think critics have a very limited value in culture.
What are some books, movies, stories that you truly enjoy?
Well, you know what the first one's going to be.
I
So
have a pretty good
Godfather.
idea.
Godfather is there's a reason that that movie resonates with so many people. I mean, it has so many enduring themes. It's just a great story. It's entertaining without being too bloody and
Mhm.
violent. There are some moments, but and as a dad and as a husband and as a man, I
Sure.
resonate deeply with a lot of the themes in that movie. It's just an enduring movie. So I love that one. I also love Field of Dreams.
Okay.
I love some of the Star Wars movies. The recent ones by Disney, not so much, but the original trilogy was really good. Well, the first two were good. Return of the Jedi was not that good. I'm just going to go on record and say I don't think the movie is that good.
Okay.
They they have about 3 good scenes worth of material that they stretched into like a 2-hour movie. The
Fair.
Ewoks
I'm
were
not arguing.
ridiculously silly. I mean, come on. Let's just be real. There were a few good scenes. Plus, the cinematography was way worse than The Empire Strikes Back.
Lot of paintings.
Yeah,
Lot of
it just isn't that
paintings.
good of a movie. But you can't tell my wife that because that's her favorite Star Wars
Is
movie,
it?
and that's totally fine.
Yeah.
So those are good. I love It's a Wonderful Life. It's one of my favorites because
Yeah.
I'm just a sentimental person at heart.
Yeah.
So I don't know. There's part of me that I don't always have a lot of interest in watching newer stuff
Mhm.
because there's so much great older stuff out there. Like last weekend, my wife was busy. It was, I think, on a Saturday night. My son was, I think he was at work, so I just got on. I think it was Paramount Plus, and I rewatched Sunset Boulevard from the
Mm.
1950s. I mean, what a phenomenal movie! Such a great story. Thematically, there's so much to chew on there.
Mhm.
So I don't know. I watched the original Dracula. I think the same night I did like a double feature.
Nice.
From
Nice.
1931.
Yeah.
So there's so much really good old stuff out there. Um, I don't know. I just feel like there's not that much really good brand new stuff.
Do you find yourself attracted to the same themes
Mm-hmm.
over and
Absolutely,
over?
without question.
What themes are they?
One is fatherhood. One is
Okay.
I think I would call it sonhood.
Okay.
Um, gosh, that's a good question. I like that question because it kind of makes you look back and go, why do I like the movies that I like, or the novels or the stories that I like? And I think when you stop and think about what you really like and what you're drawn to, that tells you something about yourself.
Yeah.
If you're willing to stop and
Right.
be a little bit introspective. So for me,
Even Field of Dreams. You mentioned Field of
Field of
Dreams.
Dreams.
Everyone's favorite scene is at the end.
Yeah.
You know,
It
where
makes
they're
me cry
playing
every
catch.
time.
Yeah. I mean, and it's like the ultimate. Like now, as writers, we're like, duh, come on, that's a great conclusion. Of course, it's gonna, but it's a surprise. First time you watch it, you're like, whoa, wow, this is incredible, and it makes sense. I mean, it really has that great ending. It's magical. Frankly, it's like you watch it, you're like, wow, this is like I want to rewatch it now, Ken, after talking to you.
Yeah, I love that movie. I'm not even a big sports fan necessarily.
Right.
I don't really go to baseball games. I don't know a lot about sports, but there's something about that theme of your relationship with your dad. You know, and I personally, I think I was also going to mention Shawshank Redemption is another one. Everybody loves that movie.
Okay.
You know, it's fantastic. I think in a lot of ways, I can't speak for women. Maybe I would include this too, but I think in many ways, our lives are defined by our fathers. Whether that's, regardless of whether you feel like your relationship with your dad is good or bad.
Right.
I think in many ways, our lives are a response to our dads in some way. Probably I should dig into that some more and talk to a therapist or something, but
why not? You're a writer. You're already kind of doing
I do, but I really do think that's true. I really, really do. And in my case, my older brother,
I mean, especially The Godfather. I mean, that's a story about legacy. Fathers.
Yeah. To me, the most gripping theme of the Godfather is here you have the youngest son, Michael Corleone, who says at the beginning, it's very explicit. He says to his girlfriend, Kay, that's my family, Kay, that's not me. Well, then, the whole twist of the story is by the end, he does become his godfather, but an actual worse version because he's much more ruthless.
Right.
And he has no sense of honor, especially by The Godfather Part 2.
Right.
And so there's this sense of, it's almost like inevitable that you somehow become your father in some ways. I mean, that's the theme of Star Wars too, a super heavy.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Family. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Fathers and sons. And
yeah,
I think maybe for men, especially, the ultimate question of life is whatever you perceive your father to be, the driving question of your life is, are you going to become your father, or are you going to go a different direction? Or are you going to take away the good qualities of your father and ignore the bad qualities? Because as you're a dad too. We all have bad qualities we hope our kids avoid.
Sure.
That's human nature. I don't know. I probably should dig into that somewhat.
There's a lot there. And
I need to think about this some more.
You do. That's awesome. No. And most men don't talk about it.
They don't.
Especially fatherhood, because it's like, it's way easier to watch The Godfather than to write a book about some of these things.
Yeah, it is.
My second novel, Like a Bad Memory, a lot of it was influenced by my relationship with my son.
Wow.
Like it was literally like, it was happening with me, and it was like, wow. And I didn't realize it until like after the fact, but I think it even bleeds into fiction, like the real life stuff. It starts popping up and you're like, oh, so that's what that's really about. And even with fiction, dialogue, theme, all these things, we're really talking about things that happen in real life, and then we're throwing in some make-believe on top.
That's right.
So whether it's Star Wars or The Godfather or whatever, it's almost like we're just making our own recipe. We're mixing things together. And even with nonfiction, you've got a lot of it. I mean, you're calling out real life. You're not like just making stuff up there. In some ways, nonfiction is even harder to write because you don't get the luxury of just making stuff up.
Yeah, it has to be accurate. That was my worry with. So a couple of years ago, I did a book called The Faith of Elvis. that I wrote with Billy Stanley, Elvis's one of his stepbrothers.
Mhm.
I was actually really terrified writing that book. I had never written a book like that before, so I was kind of intimidated by it. I knew I
Mhm.
could do it, but I was still a little bit scared.
Sure.
But what I was really worried about was, there are a lot of really big Elvis fans in the world.
Hmm.
And because this book was stories about Elvis, now it was told through the eyes of Billy,
Right.
but I was writing the book for him. I was really worried that people would pick it apart and say, well, this wasn't quite accurate and this wasn't
This ain't
quite
right.
accurate.
Yeah.
Because there are people who are obsessed with Elvis.
Sure.
And that's the case with any celebrity. And in fact, there were a couple things in the book where people would come back later and say, well, that wasn't accurate. This happened in a different year, or this little detail wasn't accurate. And I felt bad for that. But then I also kind of thought, man, I feel bad for people who are writing these big historical biographies of people. And then you have really careful readers come back and say, well, this was incorrect or this was incorrect. But it's the part that I was most nervous about was there's a chapter in the book where it talks about when Elvis went to visit who's the president? Was it Nixon?
Nixon
I'm blanking out. Okay, yeah, it was Nixon.
with the DEA thing.
Yes, he went to visit Nixon, and I mean that's a very well historically documented thing that happened,
Sure.
in history. But yet I had to kind of condense it down to a few pages, and I had to tell it kind of through Billy's perspective.
Mm.
And so I spent a long time on that chapter because I wanted it to be accurate.
Right.
And I haven't heard any pushback from it or anything, so I guess it was accurate. But yeah, nonfiction is really that's the thing with nonfiction is you have to be accurate, which is kind of intimidating.
There was even a movie.
There
Michael
was
Shannon
with Michael Shannon
of
as
all
Elvis.
people was
That was
Elvis.
a
And I
fun
was
movie.
like, it doesn't fit, but it was. I remember it was actually an interesting movie, and I don't even remember much about it other than like he doesn't look a thing like Elvis.
He doesn't.
But it was like just the behind the scenes stuff, and who knows? I have no idea how accurate any of it is, but yeah, I could see that where it's like certain events where they're a little more popular, you're like extra pressure on that to like, okay, get this right, get these facts down.
Yep.
Very interesting. Very interesting.
I actually have that. Actually, the most downloaded image from the National Archives is that picture of Elvis with Nixon.
I believe
it. In the White House, in the Oval Office. And so I printed that out. It's actually on my wall somewhere. I hung it up.
That's fitting.
Because I don't just like Elvis. I think he was a cool guy. But it's also the idea of I want a little sliver of that audacity in my life. Here was Elvis. Literally, he just had the audacity to say, I'm going to fly to D.C. and I'm going to barge in and meet with the president.
That's great.
Because I want to be a DEA agent. I mean, the absolute insanity of that, if you think about it.
I like it, though. Yeah.
But I'm like, man, I just love that boldness and that little bit of craziness.
Yeah.
Because I think all of us who are writers, we need a little injection of that.
Yeah. Don't stop yourself before.
Just do it,
Yeah.
You can be a little crazy. I mean, think of all the stuff that has been really successful, in culture. Most of that started out as ridiculously crazy ideas. I mean, even if you think of like the iPhone.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, that was mocked mercilessly when it came out.
Oh, yeah.
Because I had a friend who got one of those when it came out, and I was like, this is
you were laughing at him.
You're like, no,
I don't want that.
World. Why would anybody want a phone that has no buttons on it? That's ridiculous. Right. Well, guess what I have on my desk here?
Right.
An iPhone.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That's a great point. What an amazing end note, though, to just encourage writers, because we stop ourselves. Why not be a little crazy? Why not have some fun versus, playing it safe? Yep. And I'm pretty convinced most memorable writing is usually pretty dangerous in nature. It's not going to be something that's safe or, more vanilla, because people like Rocky Road, they have a flavor in mind. They don't want to just get like one kind of ice cream. They want to spice things up a little,
That's right. I mean, that's what makes it good. Is it
Yeah.
something different that's not just vanilla?
Yeah. Absolutely. Any parting words for other writers who are maybe thinking about writing a book, or maybe they're already in the middle of a manuscript and they're just like, wow, what did I just get myself into? Anything you'd like to share?
Yeah, just finish that sucker and put it out there. Or if you haven't started, start that sucker, write it, and then put it out there.
I love it.
Make sure it's edited, make sure it's meeting a
Right.
need of some kind, have a structure to it. But I just feel like success belongs to people who take action. That's really what it comes down to is I did the thing and I put it out there for people to read and consume. It didn't just stay on my hard drive. So the cool thing about books is that if you're self-published, you can always do another edition of it or an updated
Yeah,
version if you're not happy with it.
for sure.
No problem with that at all. People do it all the time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep.
People want to connect with you. Maybe they want a ghostwriter or author coach, kentsanders.net, right?
Yes, they can go there, or they can also just email me directly, kent@kentsanders.net. And I
Okay.
also run a membership community for writers called The Profitable Writer. And
Yes,
this
thank you.
is for writers who want to build their business. And you can find out more about that by going to theprofitablewriter.com.
All right. Love it. Thank you so much, Kent. Really appreciate
My
you.
pleasure. Thank you.